she said at brunch. I'm calling off the wedding. My heart isn't yours anymore, and I can't pretend, hide, or carry this heavy truth any longer in front of everyone. It was supposed to be a joyful morning, one of those calm, sun-washed brunches Emma and Daniel shared every Sunday. The cafe was warm and bright, filled with clinking glasses, soft chatter, and the smell of fresh bread. It felt like any ordinary day, which made what was about to happen feel even more unreal. Daniel sat across from her, smiling as he stirred sugar into his coffee. I was thinking, he said lightly, after the wedding we should take a trip, somewhere quiet, maybe Italy? Emma didn't answer. She sat still, palms flat on the table, staring at the steam rising from her untouched tea. Her heartbeat thudded against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Emma? Daniel laughed nervously. You're scaring me a little. What's going on? She looked up, and for the first time, he noticed the glassy shine in her eyes. Daniel, she said softly, I need you to listen. Really listen. He nodded, shoulders tensing. She took a breath so shaky it nearly broke her voice. I'm calling off the wedding. The words fell between them like shattered glass, too sharp, too sudden, impossible to pick up without bleeding. Daniel blinked at her, confusion turning slowly into disbelief. What? Why would you even say something like that? Emma swallowed hard. Because my heart isn't yours anymore. I kept trying to ignore it, hoping the feeling would come back, but it didn't. And I can't pretend, or hide, or carry this heavy truth any longer, especially not in front of everyone who believes we're perfect together. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The restaurant noise blurred into a dull hum, like he'd been pushed underwater. So you don't love me? He whispered. Just like that? It wasn't just that. Her voice trembled. It was slow. A quiet drift I didn't notice at first. But now it's too big to look away from. A waiter appeared beside them with 2 plates, hesitated at their faces, and silently retreated. Daniel rubbed his forehead, trying to steady the spinning room. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? No, she said quickly. You were wonderful. You were everything someone could ask for. That's what made it harder to tell you. Then why? His voice cracked. Because love isn't something you can force yourself to feel again, she whispered. And marrying you while hiding this would be cruel. She stood slowly, her chair scraping the floor. Tears gathered in her eyes but didn't fall. I'm sorry, Daniel. I truly am. Without waiting for him to respond, she stepped away from the table and walked toward the door. Sunlight wrapped around her as she left, the bell above the entrance chiming softly behind her. Daniel stayed seated, staring at the 2 untouched plates. The life he'd imagined, the home, the laughter, the future, they all dissolved quietly into the warm Sunday air. And the world around him kept moving, unaware that his had just stopped. Daniel didn't know how long he sat there. Minutes, maybe an hour. The cafe's staff moved around him quietly, as if afraid to disturb a man who had just watched his future vanish. His coffee had gone cold. The omelette congealed on the plate. Everything around him looked the same, but nothing felt the same. When he finally stood up, his legs trembled a little. He left some money on the table without counting it, and walked out into the bright, indifferent sunlight. The world outside was buzzing with life, dogs barking, kids laughing, bikes rushing past, but all of it sounded distant, muffled behind the thrum of his own heartbeat. He walked home instead of calling a cab. He needed movement, something steady to hold on to. Each step felt heavy, as if grief had weight and density. His apartment was only 10 blocks away, but the journey felt endless. When he reached the door, he hesitated. Inside that apartment were their plans, wedding invitations stacked neatly on the counter, a calendar with their honeymoon dates circled, fabric swatches for suit fittings, and a vase with the flowers Emma liked. It was a home built for 2. Now it was a shrine to something that no longer existed. He unlocked the door slowly. The silence inside felt wrong. He walked to the table and stared at the invitations, his name and hers written in elegant gold script. He picked one up, ran his thumb over the embossed letters, then set it down as carefully as if it might break. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find his sister, Claire, standing there with a bag of groceries and her usual bright expression, an expression that faded when she saw his face. "Oh God!" she whispered. "Daniel, what happened?" He didn't know how to say it. The words felt too big, too humiliating, too unreal. Instead, he stepped aside and let her in. She set the groceries down and crossed the room to him, placing her hands on his shoulders. "Talk to me." His voice was barely audible. She ended it. The wedding. Everything. Claire's eyes softened with immediate, protective grief. "Sit," she said gently. He collapsed onto the couch, and she sat beside him, waiting, patient and quiet. Daniel stared at the floor. She said her heart isn't mine anymore. Said it changed slowly, and she didn't want to pretend. He exhaled shakily. How do feelings just fade like that? How does someone wake up one day and decide you're not their person anymore? Claire didn't answer right away. She rested a hand on his arm. Sometimes love changes shape, Danny. Sometimes people grow in different directions. It's not fair, but it happens. But she let me plan a future she already knew she didn't want, he said, anger rising with the tears burning behind his eyes. She smiled through everything, cake tastings, dress fittings, all of it. And the whole time she was leaving me. Slowly. Claire squeezed his arm. She should have told you sooner. You deserved honesty. He let out a bitter laugh. Honesty at brunch. In a cafe. With avocado toast. He rubbed his face with both hands. I loved her. I would have done anything to fix this. I know, Claire whispered. That's what makes you you. For a moment, they sat in silence. Then she stood and went to the kitchen, pulling 2 mugs from the cabinet. I'm making tea, she declared. And you're going to drink it, because if we start with whiskey, I'll have to carry you home. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at his lips. You think I'm that dramatic? I know you're that dramatic, she said over her shoulder. While she busied herself with the kettle, Daniel rose and walked to the window. Outside, life looked painfully normal. People were living, laughing, loving, all the things he had expected to be doing today. He pressed his forehead against the glass. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just breathed, slow and unsteady, as if relearning how. Behind him, Claire set a mug on the coffee table. You don't have to figure everything out today, she said quietly. Just get through the next hour. Then the next. Healing isn't instant. Daniel nodded, though the words barely registered. He sank into the couch again, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. For the first time since the cafe, the world seemed a little less tilted. Not healed. Not okay. But survivable. And that was enough for today. Emma didn't go home right after leaving the cafe. Her legs moved on their own, carrying her through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. She walked past the bookstore where Daniel once bought her a novel. Just because. Past the tiny flower stand where he used to surprise her with wildflowers. Past the park where he first said I love you with a voice trembling from sincerity. Every step felt like betrayal. She kept seeing his face, frozen, wounded, trying to understand a truth she'd buried too long. A truth she hadn't wanted to hurt him with. A truth she should have spoken months ago. Emma found a bench in the park and sat, her breath catching in the cool afternoon air. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, trying to make herself smaller, less visible, less alive for a moment. She whispered to herself, You did the right thing. You did the right thing. But the words didn't comfort her. They stabbed, sharp and cold. She didn't stop loving Daniel suddenly. It was a slow fading, like sunlight leaving a room 1 hour at a time. She had tried to will the feelings back, trips, dinners, long talks, even wedding planning. But every attempt felt like patching a sinking boat. The harder she worked, the faster she sank. What she never told Daniel was this. She loved who he was, but not who she was with him anymore. The version of herself she had become, quiet, agreeable, always accommodating, didn't feel like the woman she wanted to be. And she knew that if she married him in that state, she would resent both him and herself. That was her private grief. She wiped her cheeks and forced herself up. The day wasn't even over, and she already felt years older. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from her friend Maya. "Brunch done? Want to hang later?" Emma stared at the screen. How could she explain that her entire life had just been rewritten? She typed back slowly. "Not today. I need some time." She almost added, "I ended the wedding." But she couldn't. Not yet. Not when the words still felt radioactive. Instead, she walked home, each step a quiet collapse. When she reached her apartment, she froze at the door. Inside were the remnants of a life she'd been building with Daniel: the vision board for the wedding, a binder full of vendor notes, 2 champagne glasses they'd bought for the big day. She'd have to pack all of it eventually. But not tonight. She curled up on the couch, still in her coat, still wearing the same expression of someone who had just severed her future with her own hands. And when she finally cried, really cried, it wasn't because she stopped loving Daniel. It was because loving him hadn't been enough anymore. Daniel didn't sleep much. Every hour felt like a full night. He would close his eyes and see Emma's face across that cafe table, the apology in her eyes, the softness in her voice, the finality of her words. By morning, his apartment didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a museum of a life that had expired overnight. He dragged himself into the kitchen, brewed coffee out of habit, then poured it out because the smell made him nauseous. He wasn't sure if it was the heartbreak or the exhaustion. When he checked his phone, there were messages from friends asking about wedding details, dress code, the rehearsal dinner. He stared at them without opening any. His chest tightened. He typed only 2 words in the group chat. "It's off." Then he turned his phone face down and walked away from it. He spent the morning wandering through rooms aimlessly. Touching things. Letting them go. Repeating the cycle. At noon, Claire returned with groceries and a kind of quiet determination that only sisters possess. "Get dressed," she said, tossing him a clean shirt. "For what?" "For a walk. Fresh air. Basic human functioning." He didn't argue, mostly because he didn't have the strength to. They walked through the city in comfortable silence. Claire didn't push him, didn't ask questions, didn't offer unsolicited wisdom. She simply existed beside him, anchoring him whenever he felt like drifting too far into the heaviness. At one point, Daniel spoke quietly. "I don't know who I am without her." Claire tightened her arm around his. "You're still you. You just forgot for a while." They stopped at the park. Parents played with children. College students lounged on the grass. Couples held hands and laughed. It should have hurt to watch, but instead, for a moment, Daniel felt strangely peaceful. Life didn't pause because his heart broke. It kept going. And maybe he could, too. He sat on a bench and inhaled slowly. The world smelled like wet grass and distant coffee shops. Ordinary things, grounding things. He whispered, almost too quietly for anyone to hear. "I don't want to forget her, but I don't want this pain forever." And for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a tomorrow that didn't involve her. It wasn't a betrayal. It was survival. The week after the breakup passed like a fog drifting over the days. Time blurred. Morning bled into night, and night returned with the same ache sitting in his chest. Sometimes Daniel woke up reaching for his phone, ready to send Emma a message about something small, a thought, a joke, a random memory, the way he used to. But he didn't send anything. He only stared at her name until his eyes stung. On Thursday evening, he met his childhood friend, Gray, the kind of person who spoke directly, with no sugarcoating. They sat in a dimly lit bar, the scent of old wood and whiskey around them. Gray leaned back and said, "You're acting like you were part of a formula that malfunctioned. Maybe the formula just stopped working for both of you." Daniel looked up. "You think she's hurting too?" Gray took a slow sip. Nobody makes a choice like that without pain. Just because she didn't show it in that moment doesn't mean she's not feeling it. For the first time in days, Daniel felt something shift inside him, a thin thread of empathy. Not for himself, but for her. Later that night, he returned home and pulled out a storage box. One by one, he began packing away the things related to the wedding: invitations, color samples, the half-finished seating chart. Not angrily. Not desperately. Just carefully, like setting aside the remains of a life he once believed in. At the bottom of a drawer, he found an old note Emma had written him at the start of their relationship. "You make me feel brave. And I want to walk through everything with you." He smiled sadly. That girl back then, she was different. And he was different too. Maybe they had simply grown in different directions. Emma didn't go home right after brunch. She walked for hours, trying to outrun the weight in her chest. The city moved around her, loud, bright, indifferent, and she felt her body drifting through it like a ghost. Eventually she found herself on a park bench, knees pulled to her chest, breath shaky. She whispered into the air. "You did the right thing. You did. You did." But the words didn't ease the tightness in her throat. She hadn't stopped loving Daniel all at once. It had been a slow dimming, like the sunlight fading out of a room, 1 hour at a time. She tried everything to bring it back: date nights, long talks, planning the wedding. But every attempt felt like patching a sinking boat with paper. What she never told him was that she didn't like the version of herself she had become with him near the end: careful, apologetic, small. She didn't leave him because he wasn't enough. She left because she wasn't herself anymore. The next morning, she booked a therapy session. The therapist, a gentle woman with a warm voice, asked her, "When did you first feel yourself drifting out of the life you were building?" Emma stared at her hands. "Maybe when we started planning the wedding," she said. "Or before. I don't know. I just stopped feeling like me." "And you were afraid to disappoint him?" Emma nodded. Tears blurred her vision. "Daniel was always kind. That made it harder to speak the truth." She talked for nearly an hour, about her childhood, about growing up as the good girl, about avoiding conflict at the cost of her own needs, about how she'd learned to say yes even when every part of her wanted to say no. The therapist wrote something down. "You weren't running from him," she said softly. "You were running toward yourself." Emma broke. The tears finally came. "I hurt him so much." "You hurt both of you," the therapist replied gently. But honesty is rarely painless. When the session ended, Emma walked outside with a strange new clarity. Her heart still ached, but at least now she understood its shape. That evening Emma sat on the floor of her apartment, scrolling through old photos. Not to reopen the wound, but to acknowledge its edges. Photos of them laughing under the rain, holding hands by the lake. Her favorite picture, Daniel looking at her like she was the center of the world. She touched the screen lightly. "Thank you," she whispered, not to the pictures, but to the memories. Across the city, at the same time, Daniel sat by his window listening to the hum of the night. The pain was still there, but it wasn't crushing him anymore. It was simply present. For the first time since the breakup, he imagined a future that wasn't entirely dark. Not joyful, not yet, but possible. They didn't know what tomorrow held. Whether their paths would cross again, or drift further apart. Whether the story had ended, or simply paused. But both of them, in separate quiet rooms, felt that after pain comes space. And in space, something new always begins. 3 months passed, not quickly, not softly, but steadily, like waves wearing down a stone. Daniel had changed in small, subtle ways no one noticed but him. He woke earlier now. Not out of discipline, but because his thoughts nudged him awake before dawn. Sleep came in fragments, but it no longer felt like drowning. His apartment looked different too. The wedding box he once filled was now stored on a high shelf, out of reach but not out of memory. He had rearranged the furniture one weekend, pushing the couch to the opposite wall, moving the photos, donating some old decorations. He needed the place to stop looking like a shrine to a life that didn't exist anymore. Work kept him busy. Almost too busy. Sometimes he stayed late just to avoid going home to silence. But the silence no longer felt hostile, just honest. On a Wednesday evening, after leaving the office, he stopped by a small bookstore near the train station. The last time he had been here, he was with Emma. She had laughed at a shelf of ridiculous novelty notebooks and made him buy one. Now he walked in alone. A young woman behind the counter looked up. "Let me know if you need help finding anything." He nodded. "Thanks." He wandered to the poetry section, a genre he had never cared for until Emma made him read it. He picked up a new book, flipped through it, and something caught his eye. A line underlined by a previous reader. Sometimes healing is not returning, it is becoming. He closed the book slowly. He didn't cry. He didn't break. He just stood there, letting the words settle. For the first time in months, he felt a strange warmth, not joy, not hope exactly, but something close to acceptance. He bought the book. Emma's life changed too, though from the outside she seemed perfectly fine. She changed her hair a little, not drastically, but enough to feel like a small renaissance. She started journaling every morning, something her therapist encouraged. Some pages were angry. Some pages were soft. Some pages were empty because she simply didn't know what she felt. She also took a class, something impulsive, something she'd always wanted but never allowed herself, a ceramics workshop. At first, she was terrible. Her clay bowls wobbled like drunk mushrooms. Her cups leaned like they had opinions. Her instructor laughed kindly whenever she cursed under her breath. But she enjoyed it. She enjoyed the chaos of it, the imperfection. It reminded her she was allowed to be messy, to be uncertain, to be human. One evening after class, she sat at her small kitchen table, wiping clay from her hands, when her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Have you spoken to Daniel?" Emma stared at the screen. Not a single day passed without her thinking of him, but not in a way that froze her anymore. She thought of him the way people think of childhood homes, with complicated affection, with gratitude, with the ache of knowing you can't go back. She typed back. "No. Not yet." Her mother replied. "Maybe someday you should." Emma turned her phone face down. "Maybe," she whispered into the quiet. A week later, Daniel attended a small rooftop gathering hosted by Gray. He didn't want to go. Social events still felt like walking barefoot over thin glass. But Gray insisted. "You need to see people. Also, I bought too much wine." So Daniel went. The rooftop was warm with string lights and mismatched chairs. People chatted in clusters. A soft breeze carried the smell of grilled vegetables and summer air. Daniel poured himself a drink and found a quiet corner, not hiding, just observing. That's when someone approached. A woman about his age, wearing a loose linen shirt and bright silver earrings. She had kind eyes, the sort that seemed to understand silence rather than fear it. "Hi," she said, offering a small smile. "I'm Mira. I think we've both been avoiding the crowd, so I figured I'd introduce myself before we get labeled as antisocial." He chuckled. "Daniel." They talked, not deeply, not dramatically, but comfortably. She told him she worked in environmental design. He told her about his job. She laughed easily. He found himself relaxing. At one point she said, "You have this way of listening. Like you actually hear what people mean, not just what they say." He blinked, a little surprised. Emma used to say something similar. Mira didn't flirt. She didn't lean in. She didn't try to step into a space that wasn't hers. She simply existed, kind, present, unhurried. When the night ended, she said, "It was nice talking to you. No pressure, but if you ever want to grab a coffee, I'd like that." He hesitated, not because he didn't like her, but because he didn't want to use someone as a bandage. "Maybe," he said gently. "One day." She smiled warmly. "One day sounds good." And she walked away. Daniel felt a strange calm settle into him. He wasn't ready. But he wasn't closed either. A door inside him, the one that had been locked since that brunch, creaked open a fraction. On a Sunday morning, after a long walk, Emma sat on her balcony with tea and a notebook. Birds chirped loudly in the tree nearby. The sun warmed her face. She began writing a letter. Not one she intended to send. Just one her heart needed to write. Daniel, I hope you're eating. I hope you're sleeping better than I am. I hope your days feel lighter now. I hope you know that I didn't leave because you failed. You didn't. You never did. I left because I was losing myself, and I didn't want to become someone who resented the person she loved. I'm sorry. Truly. Not for ending it, but for not having the courage to tell you sooner. You deserved honesty long before that brunch. I hope you find a love that fits you completely. The kind that doesn't shrink you or me. Be well. Emma. She folded the page carefully and tucked it into the back of her journal. Not to send. Just to acknowledge. For the first time since the breakup, she didn't cry.